I was on Interstate 75, somewhere between Macon and Valdosta, when a voice on CB Channel 19 announced the name of the rest stop where I had stopped 2 hours earlier and gave the exact time, 2:47 a.m., which was the time I had left. It wasn't directed at me, at least it didn't seem like it. It was more like someone reading a list to another person, and then came the second stop, the one from last night, with the correct time as well. I stayed quiet, holding the mic and waiting, and when the voice read the third stop, the one from 2 days ago at a gas station near Chattanooga, I felt my stomach churn because all 3 times were too accurate to be a coincidence. I stayed on the channel for another 10 minutes waiting for the voice to return, but the radio went silent, just static, and the occasional trucker talking about traffic near Tifton. The cargo was medical equipment for a distributor in Jacksonville, nothing absurdly expensive but enough to interest someone, and I was doing my usual route, the same one I had posted on Truckboard 2 days earlier with estimated times for each stop. Everyone used that forum. It was like an open WhatsApp group where we arranged parking spots at rest stops, warned about police checkpoints, and posted route plans so other drivers knew who was in the same area. I had never given it a second thought. What bothered me wasn't just the radio, it was the white truck. A Freightliner Cascadia with no stickers on the side, the cab too clean for someone on the road, which I had seen stopped at the rest stop near Perry when I left there before 3 in the morning. Now it was about 200 meters behind me, keeping its distance but keeping pace, and when I slowed down to 70, it slowed down too. It could have been a coincidence, same route, same time, but after what I heard on the radio, I couldn't accept it as a coincidence. I looked in the rearview mirror about 4 times in 2 minutes, and he was still there, neither getting closer nor disappearing, just following. My name is Lonnie Farr. I've been driving this region of Georgia and northern Florida for 6 years, and I know every rest stop, every gas station, and every dark stretch between Macon and Jacksonville. I've never had a serious problem. Maybe 2 attempted catalytic converter thefts at truck stop parking lots, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was tired. I'd been driving for about 11 hours, and the coffee wasn't having any effect anymore. And maybe that's why I took so long to notice something I should have noticed sooner. The smell. Burnt diesel with a slightly sweetish touch, like melting plastic, that appeared and disappeared every time I opened the window. It wasn't from my truck. The idea came almost automatically. I didn't think much about it before doing it. I switched to channel 22, which is a channel almost nobody uses in that stretch, and spoke as if I were answering someone, saying I was going to stop at the Hahira rest stop to rest for a couple of hours before continuing to Jacksonville. Hahira was about 35 miles ahead, and I had no intention of stopping there. In fact, my next real stop would be at the Valdosta rest stop, which is about 15 miles further on. I switched back to channel 19 and kept listening. The white truck was still behind me, same distance, same constant speed. About 12 minutes later, the voice returned. Not on channel 19, but on 22. The same deep voice without a strong accent, speaking as if reading a report. And it said Hahira with the time I had made up. I felt a strange thing in my chest, like when you confirm something you'd rather not have confirmed, because it meant that whoever was listening wasn't just on channel 19, they were scanning channels or there was someone on each one, and it meant something else that bothered me even more. The voice repeated the false information as if it were real, which meant that they weren't tracking me by GPS or anything in the truck. They were using what I myself said on the radio and what I posted on the forum. I was the source. I turned off the onboard radio. For the first time in 6 years on the road, I turned the radio off completely, and the silence inside the cabin became heavy in a way I hadn't expected. I looked in the rearview mirror and the white truck was still there, but now it had closed the distance. It was maybe 150 meters behind, and I could see that the headlights were white LEDs, very bright for the model. I picked up my cell phone to call dispatch, but I held it without dialing because I was trying to calculate something. If they thought I was going to stop in Hahira, I had about 30 minutes of head start to change the route before they realized I wasn't going to show up there. I passed the Hahira exit straight through, without slowing down, and kept looking in the mirror, waiting to see what the white truck was going to do. The white truck accelerated. Not aggressively, it just increased its steady pace and approached my left side, and when it was parallel, I looked into the cab expecting to see something, a face, a gesture, anything. But the windows were too dark, and it simply passed, continued on, and disappeared down the straightaway as if I didn't exist. I felt a strange relief for about 2 minutes. That kind of relief you know is stupid, but you let it happen because your body needs it. The road was empty for a stretch, and I started to think I had overreacted, that maybe the voice on the radio was some crazy person listening to the forum and repeating information for fun, and that the white truck was just a guy doing the same route. Then I looked in the right rearview mirror, and there was a black Peterbilt about 200 meters behind, without a logo on the door, driving at the same pace as the white one. I didn't accelerate or slow down, I just watched. And about 5 minutes later, I looked in the left rearview mirror, and there was another one, a dark gray Kenworth, a little further back but at the same speed. Neither of them tried to overtake. Neither of them slowed down, and the distance between them and me was almost identical, as if they had planned it. The white Freightliner had disappeared ahead a long time ago, and now these two occupied exactly the position it had occupied before, one on each side of the mirror. I tried changing lanes to see what would happen. I moved to the right slowly, and the black Peterbilt changed too, maintaining the same distance in the mirror. I went back to the left lane, and it moved again. The gray Kenworth didn't even budge. It remained firmly in its position as if there were an invisible line connecting it to my rear bumper. It was too coordinated to be an accident. But at the same time, it wasn't obvious enough for me to call 911 and say, "What?" That two trucks were driving behind me at the same speed on an interstate. I would have sounded crazy, and I think that was the idea, to keep everything at a level where I knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it to anyone. The smell returned. That Swedish diesel smell I'd noticed before, and this time I paid closer attention and realized it wasn't coming from behind. It was coming from the front, as if the white Freightliner had left a trail in the air. I looked at the dashboard, looked at the instruments, everything normal in my truck. But the smell wasn't from my truck, and it wasn't normal. I picked up my cell phone again, and this time dialed dispatch, but it went to voicemail after 6 rings. I looked in the rearview mirror, and the two trucks were still there, patient as if they had all the time in the world. I saw the Valdosta rest stop sign a mile away, and even without intending to stop, I looked out of habit, because for 6 years I'd stopped there on almost every trip, and my body had become automatic. The rest stop entrance appeared on the right, and I saw the truck before I could process what I was seeing. A white Freightliner, the same white Freightliner, blocking the exit with all 4 hazard lights flashing as if it had broken down there in an accident. But it wasn't an accident, because the angle was too perfect, blocking the entire exit without blocking the entrance. And any trucker entering that rest stop wouldn't be able to get out without maneuvering over the grass or waiting for someone to move that truck. I drove straight past the entrance and looked in the rearview mirror. The black Peterbilt and the gray Kenworth had closed the distance. It wasn't 200 meters anymore, maybe 60, and they were coming side by side, occupying the 2 lanes behind me as if they'd received a signal. Their speed increased along with mine as I accelerated to 80, then 85, and they effortlessly kept up, maintaining that seemingly rehearsed formation. I was trapped between them and the rest of the road ahead, and for the first time I understood what was happening. The rest stop wasn't for me to stop now. It was their reference point, the place where the encirclement changed phases, and they knew I would pass through there because it was my usual stop, the one I posted about on the forum every week. My cell phone rang, and I answered on speakerphone thinking it was dispatch returning the call, but it was an unknown number, and no one spoke for about 5 seconds. Then a voice said the name of the dispatching company, gave my cargo number, and said I had 2 options. I could pull over to the next shoulder, or they would pull over for me. I hung up and threw my cell phone onto the passenger seat, my hand trembling, and at that moment I knew there was no clean way out because they had my cell phone number, they had the cargo number, and they had surrounded me on an open interstate highway where anyone from the outside would only see 3 trucks driving together, without anything strange happening. The exit appeared about 800 meters away, and I saw the gas station lights before I saw the sign, a Love's with the parking lot full of trucks, and the yard lit with that bright white LED light. I didn't think. I just turned, cut in front of the gray Kenworth without signaling, and felt the whole truck shake as I hit the exit ramp too fast. I heard his horn behind me, long and deep, but he didn't follow. Neither of them did. I pulled into the gas station and parked in the first space I found, between two trucks with drivers sleeping inside, and stood there with my hands on the steering wheel for about 2 minutes before I could get my cell phone and call 911. The operator asked me what the emergency was, and I tried to explain. But when you say that 3 trucks were following you on an interstate, the silence on the other end lasts a second longer than it should. The patrol arrived in about 20 minutes, and I told them everything. The radio, the voice, the forum, the white truck at the rest stop, the cell phone call. The policeman wrote it down, but I could see on his face that he was treating me like a tired driver until I showed him the unknown number in the call history, and he called back and it went to an unidentified voicemail. Then he called another officer, and they talked on the radio for about 15 minutes while I waited outside smoking a cigarette I'd borrowed from a driver in the truck next to me. When he came back, he told me that in the last 6 weeks they had registered 4 cargo interceptions on that stretch of Highway 75, all involving drivers who used public forums to post their travel itineraries, and that in 3 of those cases the driver had stopped at a rest stop that he himself had advertised online. I deleted my truckboard account that same night from the Love's parking lot, and what really got to me was realizing that they had the times of my last 3 stops before I posted anything about that trip, which means they had been tracking me for weeks, using old posts to build a pattern. I was predictable, and that was the problem. Today I drive without posting anything anywhere. I change my rest stop every trip and never stop twice at the same time in the same week. Dispatch thinks I'm exaggerating. The other drivers in the yard say it was an isolated incident, but none of them heard anyone on the radio reading their routine as if it were a shopping list. I still use the onboard computer, but at a low volume, and every time a voice I don't recognize starts listing information, I turn it off and don't turn it back on for about 2 hours. What really stuck with me was the smell. That Swedish diesel smell with a hint of melting plastic that I smelled when I opened the window at speed 75, and then again when the gray Kenworth closed the distance behind me. I never found out what it was. I never smelled it again. But about twice a month I stop at a gas station in the early morning, and when I get out of the truck and take a breath, I smell something similar for half a second, and my whole body freezes before my head can even figure out why. If you're a fan of these stories, do me a solid. Hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. It tells the YouTube algorithm to push this video out to more people. I appreciate the support. The tow truck guy had been under my hood for about 20 minutes when I realized he hadn't asked what happened to the truck, not even once. He just showed up, parked the tow truck in front, and opened the hood as if he already knew what he was going to find. I was on the shoulder of US 92, somewhere between Daytona and D-Land, at 3:40 in the morning, and the guy was working with a screwdriver that he kept taking out and putting in his jacket pocket instead of leaving it in his toolbox. Then he looked up, looked at me, and said the name of my towing company without me saying anything, and I felt my stomach churn because I hadn't called any towing service. I just stared at the guy without answering, and he kept tinkering under the hood as if nothing strange had happened. That's when I started going back to the minutes before the breakdown, trying to understand how I'd gotten there. The cargo was electronics, tablets, and laptops for a retail chain in Orlando, and I'd left Jacksonville around 11 at night on US 92 because I prefer that stretch at night when the traffic disappears. Everything was normal until about 40 minutes ago, when a dark sedan with its low beams appeared in my left rearview mirror and stayed there beside me, slowing down along with me on a part of the road where there was no one else. I thought it was someone distracted or afraid to overtake a truck at night. I didn't think much about it. The sedan accelerated and sped ahead, and about 2 minutes later the entire dashboard went blank all at once. It didn't happen gradually. It didn't flicker. It was as if someone had ripped the power off the entire truck in a second. Headlights, GPS, radio, everything dead, and I lost speed in the dark with the engine sputtering until I stopped on the gravel shoulder. I spent about 3 minutes trying to start it without any result and grabbed my cell phone to call dispatch. And while I was explaining the situation to the guy at the call center, I saw the tow truck's headlights appearing behind me, already maneuvering to park ahead. I hadn't even finished the call. Dispatch said they hadn't sent anyone yet, and that it would take at least 40 minutes for a tow truck to arrive in that area. My name is Bud Colton. I've been driving around Florida for 4 years, and I know US 92 from Jacksonville to Orlando like the back of my hand, from my bedroom to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I've never had an electrical problem like this before. The truck was up to date on maintenance and had been serviced 2 weeks prior. The tow truck driver got off the truck wearing a dark blue jacket with no name on it, no company logo, and came straight to the hood without asking anything, without introducing himself, without asking permission, and the only tool he pulled out of his pocket was that screwdriver. Not a toolbox, not a kit, just a screwdriver he twirled between his fingers when he wasn't using it. The tow truck was white and too clean without a rear license plate, and had a side sticker so faded I couldn't even read the company name up close. I called dispatch again and waited on hold while the guy continued working under the hood, watching him with that screwdriver that went in and out of his jacket pocket as if it were an extension of his hand. Dispatch answered, and I asked if anyone had sent a tow truck to my location, and the guy at the call center said no, that they were still trying to find an available service provider in that area, and that I would have to wait. When I hung up, the tow truck driver patted the hood twice, walked around, and said I could try to start the car, that he thought it was a loose relay, and that he had already repositioned it. He said this in a calm voice, like someone explaining something obvious, and I noticed that he wasn't sweaty or dirty. His hands were too clean for someone who had just been working under a truck hood. I sat in the cab and turned the key. The truck started on the first try as if it had never had a problem before. Dashboard lit up, lights working, engine running smoothly, and I felt a relief that almost made me forget that none of this made sense. A loose relay doesn't shut down an entire truck like that, I know that. But at 3:30 in the morning on the dark shoulder of the 92 with a load of electronics that needed to be in Orlando before 8, I wanted the explanation to be true. The guy stood next to the tow truck with his hands in his jacket pockets waiting for me to leave, and before engaging the gear, I asked him how he knew the name of the shipping company. He said he heard it on the frequency, that it was common, and gave a short smile that didn't reach his eyes. I left the shoulder and got back on the 92, feeling that something was wrong but without being able to pinpoint what. In the rearview mirror, I saw the tow truck falling behind with its headlights on, and the guy still standing in the same place watching my truck drive away. The air inside the cabin was different, a faint smell of new plastic that wasn't there before, and I ran my hand over the dashboard looking for something out of place, but found nothing. I looked under the steering wheel. I looked at the GPS mount. Everything seemed the same, but I didn't know what to look for, and I think that was the point, because if you don't know that someone put something inside your cabin, you're not going to find it by searching in the dark at 80 miles per hour. I stopped at a gas station about 20 minutes later because I needed coffee and wanted to get out of the cab to think with the cool air on my face. When I got out and walked around to the passenger side, I saw something that made me stop. On the passenger side window, there was a clean, clear fingerprint in the fog, on the inside, high up near the top corner, a position I couldn't have reached from the driver's seat even if I stretched my arm. Someone had touched that window from inside the cab while I was outside, and the only person who had access was the tow truck driver. I stared at the mark for about 10 seconds trying to find another explanation, but I couldn't find any. I opened the passenger door and started searching without really knowing what I was looking for. I looked under the seat, ran my hand over the carpet, opened the glove compartment, and when I reached into the space between the seat and the cab wall, my fingers touched cold metal. I pulled it out and it was a screwdriver, the same one the guy kept twirling between his fingers and keeping in his jacket pocket, with the black handle and worn Phillips head. The guy had forgotten the tool inside my truck, or at least that's what I wanted to believe, but who forgets the only tool they brought for a job? I held the screwdriver and instinctively looked at the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. The mirror support had a screw different from the other three, silver and new, with a clean Phillips head, while the others were dark and rusty with scratched heads from years of use. Someone had unscrewed the support and screwed it back in, and I looked at the screwdriver in my hand and the screw, and they matched. I leaned back in the seat and stood there staring at that gleaming screw amidst the other three dark ones, and a chill ran down my neck because I understood that the guy hadn't forgotten the screwdriver. He'd finished the job and didn't need it anymore. The mirror was pointing slightly lower than normal, not at the road behind me, but into the cab, at the driver's seat and the space where I keep the cargo documents. The smell of new plastic that I'd noticed when I pulled over from the shoulder returned stronger now that I knew where it was coming from. The support, something that was behind or inside that support that hadn't been there before. I looked through the gas station window and saw the empty parking lot, the fluorescent lights buzzing, and at the far end of the access road, stopped with its headlights off, a dark sedan that could have been any car, but one I'd seen before that night. I grabbed the screwdriver and fitted it onto the silver screw, turned it slowly, and it came out easily, almost without resistance, as if it had been placed there to be removed quickly if needed. I removed the other 3 original screws that were more stubborn, and the entire mirror support detached from the roof. Behind it, taped with black adhesive tape in the space between the support and the trim, was something that took me about 2 seconds to recognize. It was a camera, smaller than a matchbox, with a tiny round lens pointed downwards at an angle that covered the driver's seat, the steering wheel, and the document compartment where I keep the cargo manifest with the delivery address and declared value. I held the support with the camera hanging from it and felt my hands grow cold because that wasn't a tracker. Trackers you hide under the chassis. That was an eye. I turned the camera around to get a better look and I saw it. A red light the size of a pinhead, blinking at a slow, steady pace. I don't know much about technology, but I know enough to understand that a blinking light means it's on, and if it's on, someone is receiving it on the other end. I reflexively covered the lens with my thumb as if that would change anything, and looked through the windshield at the gas station parking lot. The dark sedan that had been parked in the background with its headlights off turned on its lights. Not the headlights, the parking lights, as if someone inside the car had turned on the ignition at that exact second, and the car began to move slowly toward the gas station's access road, in my direction. They were watching, and now they knew I was watching them. I ripped the camera off its mount, tape and all, threw it on the cab floor and started the engine. It started instantly, and I pulled out of the gas station parking lot, passing the sedan that was already entering the access road. For a split second, I saw the car's interior illuminated by the dashboard light. 2 guys, the passenger holding something that could have been a cell phone or a radio, and the driver staring directly at me expressionlessly as I passed. I got into the 92 accelerating more than I should have and looked in the rearview mirror. The sedan was stopped at the gas station entrance for about 5 seconds, then turned around and entered the road behind me, keeping a distance. I grabbed my cell phone with one hand and dialed 911 while driving the 92 with the dead camera on the cab floor, its red light still flashing toward the ceiling. I drove for about 12 minutes with the sedan behind me until I spotted a pilot truck stop with a full yard, and I cut through the diesel lane, stopped in front of the store where there was a light and a security camera, and the sedan went straight past the 92 without slowing down. The police arrived in about 15 minutes, and I showed them the camera that was still on the cab floor with the red light flashing, and the officer looked at it with a face that told me he had seen something similar before. They asked me to open the trunk, and that's when the floor disappeared, because 8 boxes of laptops were missing from the left side. Exactly the side that was facing the shoulder when I stopped with the breakdown. The side I couldn't see from the cab while the tow truck driver distracted me messing with the hood. The seal was intact on the outside but had been cut and reattached with a material that imitated the original, and in the following weeks the police traced the camera signal to a warehouse near DeLand, where they found monitoring equipment, towing tools, and more identical cameras still in their packaging. The scheme had been operating for at least 5 months, and the camera wasn't just for filming the protest. It was for live tracking of the driver's route to the delivery point, where another group was waiting to steal the rest, and I was the first to find them before the second interception. The company replaced the mirror support with a new one, and the mechanic used 4 identical screws, all dark and factory-made, and I watched him install each one. Now I don't stop on the shoulder at night anymore. If the truck breaks down, I drive on reserve fuel until I find a well-lit gas station with a camera and some people around, and if someone offers help before I ask, I start the engine and drive away. But what really stuck with me is something else. Every now and then, without thinking, I look at the cab roof and check the mirror support screws one by one, looking for one that's shining brighter than the others, and this reflex has become as automatic as looking in the rearview mirror before changing lanes. I was on Interstate 40, about 20 minutes after leaving Durham when I first heard the noise. A dull thud coming from inside the cargo hold that sounded like a heavy box tipping over, except the load was secured and stacked the way I always brake, and I had checked before leaving the dock. I slowed down a bit and listened, and for about 2 minutes nothing else came. Then it came again, but this time it wasn't a thud. It was a dragging, slow sound, as if something was moving inside from side to side, and no box does that on its own on a straight road without curves or braking. I listened for another 30 seconds, but the noise stopped and I kept driving, trying to convince myself it was the cargo settling, because sometimes that happens in the first few kilometers. But deep down I knew that dragging sound wasn't the boxes settling. The cargo was computer equipment, servers and network switches for a data center in Charlotte, all packed in wooden crates with foam inside, heavy and well secured, the kind of cargo that doesn't move once you fasten the straps. I had left the Durham dock around 4:40 in the morning, still dark, and the loading was faster than usual because the shift supervisor, a guy named Dale whom I had never seen before at that dock, kept hurrying everyone along, saying there was another truck waiting to enter the bay. It wasn't the usual supervisor, Ricks, whom I had known for 2 years, and who always let me check everything at my own pace. Dale offered to seal the truck himself while I signed the papers in the office, and I let him because I was running late, and because sealing is a simple procedure. You pass the cable, press the seal, and write down the number. When I returned, the truck was already closed and sealed. The seal number matched the manifest, and I saw no reason to be suspicious. But now, driving around in quarantine with that third sound stuck in my head, the quick metallic click that didn't match anything inside those boxes, I started going back over the details of that dock, trying to remember if I had seen anything out of place. Dale had stayed outside the truck the whole time while the other 2 guys at the dock were loading. At least that's what I thought I had seen. But the truth is, I was in the office signing papers and didn't see the exact moment the truck doors closed. They call me Pete Hollins, and I've been driving this Durham-Charlotte route about 3 times a week for a year and a half, always around 40, always in the early morning, always carrying a load of technology worth more than my truck. I never installed an additional lock on the cargo box because the company didn't require it, and the standard seal was always sufficient. And because in a year and a half I'd never missed a single delivery. I looked in the rearview mirror, and the cargo box was there as always. Closed, the same shape as always, but I couldn't stop looking at it as if it were different. I slowed down when I passed a more uneven stretch of road and listened carefully. Nothing. Total silence for about 5 minutes. Then I went over a seam in the asphalt and the truck shook slightly, and from inside the cargo box came a sound that wasn't a thud or a scrape or a click. It was a muffled, short sound that sounded like someone adjusting in a tight space. I decided to pull over to the side of the road about 3 minutes later, because I couldn't keep driving pretending everything was normal. I pulled over slowly, turned off the engine, and got out. The air was cold and damp, that North Carolina pre-sunrise chill that seeps into your collar and stays there, and the road was empty in both directions. I walked around the truck, looking the entire cargo area from the outside, ran my hand along the left side, then the right, checked the hinges, checked the seal, everything in place. The seal number matching the manifest, no marks, no openings, no sign of tampering. I pressed my ear against the left side wall and stayed silent. 30 seconds. I heard nothing. I moved to the right side and pressed against it again, and this time I stayed longer, almost a minute, and when I was starting to convince myself it was paranoia, I raised my hand and gave the wall a firm tap with my open palm. The sound echoed inside the cargo area and died away, and the silence that followed was unlike any silence I'd ever heard inside a loaded trailer. It wasn't the silence of a stationary load taking up space. It was the silence of something that had been making noise and stopped the instant it realized I was listening. It's hard to explain the difference, but when you've worked with trucks for a long time, you learn to feel the weight of the cargo box by the sound, and that box was heavier than it should have been. I went back to the cab and sat with my hands on the steering wheel, looking in the rearview mirror where the cargo box appeared in the dim light. I thought about breaking the seal and opening the doors right there, but if I broke the seal without authorization, and there was nothing wrong, I would have to explain to the company why the cargo arrived with the seal broken and sign a bunch of papers that nobody wants to sign. The protocol is clear. An intact seal means intact cargo, and if the seal is intact, you proceed to your destination and report it there. So I started the engine, put it in gear, and headed back to 40, knowing that the right decision according to protocol was the wrong decision according to instinct. And for the next 40 minutes to Charlotte, I drove looking more in the rearview mirror than at the road. I grabbed my phone and called Rix, the supervisor I knew, the one who always let me check things at my own pace. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding like he was sleeping, and I asked him directly if he was off that night, and who the Dale was who had taken over the shift at the dock. He was silent for a couple of seconds and said he wasn't off, that his shift started at 6, and that he didn't know any Dale in that operation. He asked why, and I didn't know what to answer properly. I said I'd explain later and hung up, holding the phone and feeling the whole thing shift in my head because if Dale wasn't a real supervisor, then he didn't have the authority to speed up the loading or seal the container alone, and everything he did at that dock was to ensure I wasn't near the doors when they were closing. I was about 25 minutes from Charlotte when I heard the sound from inside the container, and this time it wasn't a thud, a drag, or a click. It was wood, the specific sound of a wooden box being slowly opened, that dry creak of a nail coming out of a plank, slow and deliberate as if whoever was doing it was in no hurry anymore. It lasted about 4 seconds and stopped, and then came another identical sound from another box, and I understood that whoever was inside was no longer hiding, was working. They were opening the cargo in the dark inside the moving truck, separating what they were going to take from what they were going to leave, and I was there in the cab 3 meters away, driving his truck to its destination, as if I were the getaway driver without knowing it. I accelerated without thinking, and almost hit the car in front when I entered the urban area of Charlotte, and I started to see the traffic lights and the city lights, and everything seemed wrong, too normal for what was happening inside my truck. I called dispatch, and this time I told them everything. Dale, Rix, the noises, and the guy at the dispatch center told me to go straight to the delivery point in the industrial park and not to open the truck alone under any circumstances, that he was going to call 911. There were about 12 minutes left to the destination, and I drove each one listening to sounds from inside the truck, which were now more frequent and less careful, as if the guy inside knew time was running out and had sped up his work. At a red light, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that the gap between the 2 doors of the truck was wider than when I left Durham, only about 2 fingers width, but enough for me to see that the internal lock had marks that weren't there before, thin, shiny scratches on the dark metal, and I understood that he hadn't entered through the door. He was trying to get out. I arrived at the industrial park in Charlotte and pulled up to the delivery dock, but the parking lot was empty. No one from the company had arrived yet, and neither had the police. I turned off the engine and listened, and from inside the truck bed came a constant noise now, completely undisguised. Boxes being pushed, wood banging, and a sound of metal scraping metal that I felt against my teeth. I got out of the truck and went to the truck bed doors, knowing I shouldn't open them myself, but also knowing that if I stood there listening to that for another 5 minutes, I would go crazy. I grabbed the locking latch, broke the seal, turned the latch, and pulled open the right door. The guy was less than 2 meters from me, crouched between open boxes with a crowbar in his hand and a black backpack on his shoulder. And for a split second, we looked at each other in silence, as if neither of us knew what was coming next. He came at me with his shoulder, hit me in the chest, and I fell backward onto the asphalt, hitting my head on the ground. While I was trying to get up, he jumped out of the truck bed, stepping over me, and ran towards the warehouses on the other side of the parking lot. I got up with a bleeding lip and instinctively chased after him for about 30 meters, until I lost him in an alley between 2 warehouses where the light didn't reach. I went back to the truck with my heart pounding in my throat and looked inside the truck bed. What I saw was what the voice on dispatch had tried to prepare me to see. But no amount of preparation solves anything. 6 open wooden crates with torn foam, empty spaces where servers should have been, tools scattered on the floor of the truck bed that weren't mine, and on the inner lock of the left door, the one I hadn't opened, deep shiny scratches on the dark metal where the guy had tried to force his way out from the inside before I opened it from the outside. The police arrived about 4 minutes later and found me sitting on the rear bumper, holding a piece of paper towel to my lip, staring at the open trunk doors as if they belonged to someone else. The police caught the guy 2 hours later at a motel near Charlotte with a backpack full of switches and 3 server hard drives, worth more than 2 months' salary. In his statement, he implicated Dale, who wasn't even called Dale, a guy from Raleigh who recruited contractors at the docks to stuff items into the cargo boxes in the final minutes of loading while the driver was away. The scheme had been operating for at least 7 months, and the part that kept me up at night was when the investigator showed me the records of my last deliveries and pointed out small discrepancies in 3 previous deliveries. 2 boxes here, a server there, quantities so small they passed as inventory errors at the origin dock, and nobody questioned it. I'd been getting robbed for months without knowing it. Every trip I made with that sealed and undamaged cargo box, someone inside had them taking whatever they wanted in the dark while I drove, listening to the radio and drinking coffee. The only reason I noticed this time was that the new guy was less careful than the others and made too much noise. The company installed an internal camera in the truck's cargo compartment the following week, and I started demanding an escort for all cargo above a certain value. But what really changed was something else. I never again let anyone else seal my cargo compartment, and I never again left the dock without seeing the doors close with my own eyes. Today I ride with a camera in the trunk, a reinforced lock, and I never let anyone else lock it for me anymore. But none of that changed what really changed. Every time I go over a bump in the asphalt and the trunk shakes, I turn down the radio and listen, waiting for a thud, a scrape, a click that shouldn't be there, and I stay like that for about 30 seconds before I can breathe normally again. The silence inside the trunk never sounded like silence again. Now it sounds like someone who's quiet. To keep these stories coming, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. That engagement is fuel for the channel. It helps YouTube deliver these videos to more folks out on the highway. Stay safe, and keep the shiny side up.